Hey YouTube, it's Dirac Master, and I'm going to be going over a Megabug deck for you guys today. Megabugs have been struggling to get into the top 8 at KMCs. I don't think there has been one yet, and I honestly don't know much about how other people play Megabugs. I made a Rush version of Megabugs, but it's kind of like a mid-game Rush deck. You can play early game or ramp into mid-game pretty quick, and it caps out at 6. If you want to get up to 8, it just gives you more options to play more than one thing per turn. But this is a more rush-oriented build. I'll try out some other versions of Megabugs, because I haven't even really looked at Megabug deck lists. This particular deck, in my opinion, gets slaughtered by Greed Dragons, just because it can't handle some of the dragons that come out, and Bottle of Wishes is always an issue. If they bottle into an Infernus the Awakened, this deck has pretty much just as many problems as Mono Red Rush. But against Control, at least, I feel like it can survive better even if they get an Andromeda out. And the reason I'm looking at something like Megabugs is because this deck is interesting to me, and I wanted to try it out. I've been testing this against my own Water Darkness Light deck, and is doing fairly well. I tested against my Greed deck as well, and they just got crushed, as does Rush. It's just kind of hard for either of those to beat one of them, in my opinion, and that's why I feel like Megabugs and Rush are having a hard time, is because things like Greed Dragons and Bottle, they just give decks like this a hard time, make them less competitive. I would be going over decks from the meta, but mine are incredibly close to other builds, so I'm not going to even really bother with those. It would just be bringing you the decks that won KMCs or placed at KMCs, except 2-3 cards tops being different. So, I'm going to get into the builds. I'll explain some things as I go, and talk about some choices at the very end as well. So, first off, I've got 3 Hive Queen. This is the heart of the deck. Pulls off some very, very good things with all the creatures in here. And since it's not just a Megabug that works, it's just a non-evolution creature that is level 5 or less can be put in. I made some interesting choices. They're not really interesting, but some choices with what cards to put in, just because of that part of the ability. And I'll cover those as we get there. Splinterclaw Wasp being an important one of those choices. Shoutouts to Carl Reddish, also known as Thunder Sultan on YouTube. The Splinterclaw Wasp can beat down Lyra because of the powerful attack, and it's a double breaker on turn 5, which is also important with the Hive Queen, because Hive Queen can get him out, and he is a double breaker that can be brought out with Hive Queen, so that's important. Not to mention he's a Megabug. That's another important part. Now on to probably my second favorite Megabug would be Manapod, because Manapod is your pretty classic searcher for like Megabugs. It's important for getting the Hive Queen out as early as possible. It's important to get just anything, like typically if I see one of these, I'll grab it over something like Splinterclaw Wasp, but we're getting to Manapod Beetle next. It really just, it's a nice creature to have. It searches 4 deep and gets you a Megabug, so you don't lose any hand size by playing it, which is kind of important in a rush deck. So, Manapod's really good. I also use it when it pops up off of the Hive Queen. It's kind of nice too, because I can add 1 to my hand. Next up, Manapod Beetles. Easy turn 2, 1000 power, and gets banished, put into your mana zone. Just a good way to rush, and if things go bad, it goes into your mana zone. So it does do pretty well. It's better than a lot of other early game Megabugs. Then I've got 3 Ambush Scorpions for more turn 2 pressure. It's a Megabug, works well for evolving into Hive Queen, and it can be grabbed with Mana Tick. So pretty self-explanatory with the rest of that. 3 Reap and Sow, because I like this to be kind of a mid-game rush deck. It plays some creatures early game if it doesn't have mana ramp, but a lot of times I'll ramp up to mid-game pretty quick, so I've got like 6 mana on turn 4, or turn 4 sometimes, turn 5 other times, it depends. And this can be really powerful because that's letting me play some bigger creatures as though they were rush creatures, so it's really important. And also you don't lose any hand size, which is another important thing about it. And then I've got 3 Sprout for the same reason I have Reap and Sow. Quick mana, and ramps me up to my bigger creatures quicker, so I can contend with rush a lot better by having better creatures than them around the same time, and I'll be able to beat control better because I'll be putting out double breakers and comboing with things like the Hive Queen a lot quicker in the game as well. And that's getting past that is also another important thing with things like Aqua Strider, because Aqua Strider obviously beats most early game creatures as a blocker, and you're going to want to get some stronger creatures out quicker. So the only creature in my deck, other than the Hive Queen itself, that Hive Queen won't get is Tatsurion the Champion. I've got 3 of him. He's got that mana ramp ability, which when I play him turn 6, it'll allow me the next turn to play a level 2 Megabug and then evolve it into Hive Queen, things like that. It can fast attack depending on whether or not you get the right card in your mana, which isn't too big of a deal. About half of the deck is fire, so just under 50% of the time you're going to be hitting that with Tatsurion and getting the ability. Really good just to have another double breaker that can fast attack and can either ram into or run over Lyra, depending, because Lyra is another threat that things have to deal with. A lot of times I'll just go in anyways, but being able to deal with Lyra is just a bonus. Then obviously going to want to run in this deck 3 Steamtanks, because Steamtank is a Megabug himself, so that brings us back to Mana Tick being really important. Can grab Steamtank, and it searches 4, so a lot of times you're going to see one. And it's really important for Hive Queen because it'll let creatures that come in off of Hive Queen attack regardless and be even stronger, so they can either attack other creatures and deal with those, or they can just attack shields, go for the win. I've got 2 Gorim. Gorim sadly doesn't share in the Megabug aspect, so he's a little less useful in this deck, especially at only 3,000 power, but depending on the situation I'm in, I might play him from my hand. He's good early game mana fixing. Not that this deck needs a bunch of it, but it's nice to be able to drop one of those in and play a Weaponized Razorcat the next turn. That's the next card we'll get to. And he's also able to be brought in off of the Hive Queen, and depending on what you have, that the plus 3,000 power and attacking untapped creatures for one of your other creatures can really be important. So if he comes in, he can be really useful. But at the same time, he's definitely not worth running at 3 in this deck, in my opinion. So I've got 3 Weaponized Razorcat. I was thinking about making this slightly less fire and going with Beastkin just because of things like Gorim and Razorcat being part Beastkin, but I decided not to. It's mostly a focus on Megabugs, and the Beastkin would make this deck a little trickier to put together, and I don't think it would work as well that way as it does like this. Maybe in a less rush-oriented deck I could put in Beastkin, but in this deck I feel like just focusing on these is better. Razorcat's just good early game pressure, and he's multi-civ kinda hurts him later because he can slow you down, but this deck doesn't really have a problem with that. I've got 3 Gilaflame because why not? He's a good turn 4. He comes in with the Hive Queen. That's a really powerful play, and he's really good if you have Steamtank, because just the plus 2,000 power would put him at 7,000, so he can come in, kill a lot of, like, most creatures that your opponent will probably have, including Lyra. I know I focus on that a lot, but it's just a good example because it's always run and things like that, and kills them off pretty well, so that's always nice. 3 Tornado Flame, it kills the main problematic blockers of the decks that play blockers, and it's also just anti-rush. I don't like putting Barrage in against Rush because it's less effective against Control, just looking at matchup consistency. It's also for Greed Dragons when they try to play Heralds, just one more way to deal with them because this is a really bad matchup. And it also hits the evolution creatures in Mono Red Rush, which is a big bonus. Barrage would work, but it just, matchup-wise, I don't like it as much. And I don't want to be relying on Shield Blasts too much in this deck. I want to be controlling the situation as much as possible. So this is really just a choice. I probably would have been playing Heat Seekers if it weren't for the fact that this is a Shield Blast. It's nice to have a few of those, and this deck ramps fairly well most of the time, so I'm going to be in a good enough situation to rely on 5 mana instead of 3, get the extra power in the Shield Blast. And then 2 Comet Missile, because I have a few ways to deal with blockers. I try to ramp past the blockers too, which is one reason they're not as big a problem if you start playing blockers on me. So having 2 Comet Missile is nice. This way I have the Comet Missile answer to blockers, but it's not a really big deal if I don't get the blockers out of there. And I just like having 2. 3 might be nice, but let's be honest, most decks playing blockers are controlled decks playing 6 blockers in 50 plus decks, so they're going to be drawing them much less frequently than I'm going to have a Comet Missile ready for them. So it's actually working out very well just having 2 Comet Missiles. I typically don't even need it in this deck, but when I play it, it can effectively put me another turn ahead. And when I don't play it, it's nice mana, or I just don't see it, and that works too. So I'm going to be right back. I'm going to talk about a few more things about the deck, so there might be a little jump in the video. Alright, so I'm back with the cards out to discuss. I've talked about a little bit of this, but here's some tips with this deck, I guess. The Hive Queen and Gilaflame obviously work really well together. If you don't have your Steamtank out for the Hive Queen, that little combo, it's going to be really important to hit this when you're pushing for game. It really depends on the situation what you want to grab, but if you see like Gilaflame, it's really powerful, goes back to your hand, and it's one of the better ways to deal with beating Andromeda once it comes out, because you can drop these, and since this deck gets up to a decent amount of mana, you can drop some smaller creatures that you can sacrifice to get some extra attacks in, and that can be really helpful. This deck doesn't always win after one Andromeda gets dropped. It typically loses, as you would expect a Rush deck to, but after Andromeda gets dropped, it still has a chance as long as it's not too reckless and has decent control set up already. This going back to your hand after coming out on the Hive Queen is also really, really helpful, because you can afford to be a little more reckless with it, and it won't die. It'll just go back to your hand, and you'll have it fast attack, like, ready whenever you need it. Plus, turn 4 Gilaflame, always nice. The mana ramp puts you up to this 8,000 double breaker that gets you everything you want incredibly quickly. So a lot of times, if I get these two, I'm really excited to see them. I'll sprout, next turn I'll do Reap and Sow, and then I'll just start dropping threats, like level 6 creatures, or I'll drop a mana tick and one more creature in the same turn. And it really just gets crazy after that, especially because mana tick fetches steam tanks. Getting the steam tank off of mana tick is always really fun. That or Hive Queen, probably the two best. Yeah, I just want to talk about some choices like Tornado Flame. I know I spent a little time on this just a bit ago in this video, but the Tornado Flame is really just matchup choice, as is a lot of this. I don't have things like Root Trap in here. I wanted to talk about that. Spells really don't save me with this deck against things like Control. If I get to the point where I'm casting Root Trap against another deck, I'm probably going to lose anyways. Like against Greed, if they're getting threats out like that off of a Herald, I'm pretty much defeated by the time I can cast Root Trap. Greed's not going to go in on my shields to hit Root Trap if it's in my shields. Really the only deck that would save you against is Rush, by having more shields that could potentially save you. But if you have to cast a Root Trap in this deck, you're done. Which is why Tornado Flame is nice. It gets rid of Heralds pretty much on turn because I'm mana ramping, they're playing birds. So typically Tornado Flame is at the same time as a Herald would be. And I've got other reasons to not really be afraid of that part of Greed. The really big deal is if they survive long enough to get out Infernuses or Andromedas. Those are really big deals for this deck, and Bottle of Wishes is always really tough to deal with in that matchup. So Herald shouldn't really be a huge threat to this deck. You've always got things that can remove it. Lux being the one thing that might complicate the situation, but you just gotta be aware in that matchup. Probably play a few less little creatures. Don't attack with them as recklessly. Just make sure that you don't get surprised by Herald. That's most of the matchup, like, choices. Root Trap not being in here is working just fine. As I said, if you get to that point in the game where you can cast it, you're done anyways. They have enough mana to keep dropping things that are going to stop you from winning. And if you get to that point where your opponent in a deck like Control is attacking your shields, you're done anyway. So I can't really say much more than that. It's just the card doesn't really fit in this deck because of the time it's played. That's just some matchup like choices there. I feel like the lack of Shield Blasts works just fine because the only matchup it needs them in is Rush. And Rush, this deck I think can deal fairly well with Rush without the Shield Blasts. It's got plenty of ways to contend with early game. It can get up to the mid game and start beating Rush in mid game. I'm sure this deck has some bad matchups I haven't covered, but really it's just main weakness is Greed, this build anyways. I don't know about other Megabugs. So just tell me what you guys think of this. I like the deck. The Hive Queen, Steamtank, and Manatick are my favorite cards in here. Hive Queen, Steamtank can do some real damage with combos, and it just gets really nice to have such good synergy with these Megabugs. Really glad Steamtank was a Megabug. Deck's working out pretty nice for me, and it's fairly easy to get, like, money-wise. So for those people that don't want to really play Mono Red Rush but are on a budget, Megabugs might be a fun deck to do. Deck's not the best, but it's really fun. I've had a blast playing it and testing it and everything. So tell me what you guys think. If you have any suggestions or thoughts on my choices in the deck, and I guess that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not already. I'll try to leave links to like my Twitter and stuff in the description. I know people do that in YouTube videos, and my Twitter's got a fairly small number of followers, so I guess I could use a few more of you guys. Yeah, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment on your thoughts and opinions and all that. See you guys later.